Well, good morning, Vicki Dalesandro.
Good morning.
It's a thrill to have you here. First of all, because you seldom come this way from out west, where you've lived how many years in ministry?
Well, 59, I guess, probably.
That's quite a bit. And here you are celebrating your 60th year
Right.
as an Adrian Dominican.
Mhm.
As you reflect back on your 60 years, what has been the joy of being an Adrian Dominican for you?
Well, I think for me, it's been a real pleasure to be in this congregation because I feel like it has always stretched me to grow because I can be pretty conservative, and the congregation has always just been in the next step forward. So that's been very good for me to help me to grow.
So are you saying the Vatican II changes were a challenge?
Yes, they were.
Mhm.
Probably changing the habit was the most difficult for me. I really enjoyed the changes of sharing faith and life. That was something I've always enjoyed.
So I take it 59 years that your family must be from the West.
Yes, my family's from, well, my mother's actually from Maine, but she met my father and she went out to California when she was about 16. So yes, everybody's in California now.
Did you go out for movie possibilities
No.
like Hollywood?
No, her father was interesting. He was a baker and he saw the pictures of the orange trees in California, and he was very much into healthy living and healthy eating, so he decided he wanted to move his family out there, 1926.
Oh, my. Brilliant, brilliant.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Did your family ever talk about living through the Depression?
Yes, my mother did. And of course, I remember, not the Depression, but I remember the rationing during the Second World War.
For automobiles and food and shoes and I forget what else.
I remember food, but I remember collecting things like the silver wrappings from the gum and string, and even the grease, like if we had bacon, you'd collect the bacon grease and take it to the store so they could make soap.
That was a wonderful sense we were given of being part of the conflict that was going on.
It was.
Yes. Please, your highlight of 60 years as far as ministry. What spots, what people have touched your heart forever and ever?
Well, I went to school at St. Raphael's in Los Angeles, so going back there to teach in 1968 was really a pleasure because we didn't usually do that. And so some of the people that had been there, parents of my sister and brother when they were in school, their classmates when they were in school, they were still there. That parish had quite a family spirit. We recently had an all alumni gathering, and I was an alumni of that school too, so it was quite a pleasure. El Paso was another place. I just loved the people there. They were very warm, very Catholic.
In Texas.
In Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And
Did you learn Spanish there?
I learned Spanish actually before I went there. In 1974, I was offered a position in Los Angeles to work in a Mexican national parish. And the priest that offered me the job knew that I'd been trying to learn Spanish. I'd been in a school where all the students were first generation, so their parents didn't speak English. And he sent me to Mexico to learn Spanish. He said I would learn it by osmosis. I called him after a week and I said, I am not learning by osmosis, I need to do something. So I had some money to go to Berlitz, and I went like twice a week, and then I would study all day the other days. And I lived with a family that was just wonderful. I feel like I learned about a third of my Spanish just living there with them and being in Mexico City, and another third from the school, and I've already forgotten what the other third is. Well, probably being there, the family, and the school. Those were the three ways that I think I learned. I had a minor in Spanish, but it took me a month and a half before I could hear words. All I heard was sounds the first month and a half. So,
and do you use Spanish today in your
I
ministry?
do. That's what I like about the responsible early detection for breast cancer that I work with. I work with the Spanish-speaking women.
And where is that?
In Las Vegas, Nevada, at our hospital.
That's an amazing thing for a hospital to be doing, isn't it? That kind of outreach.
It's wonderful. You know, Sister Robert Joseph started a lot of our outreach programs, and I think she started that one too.
Wasn't there a school named after her?
There is a school. I was amazed. They named a school in Las Vegas after Sister, and it's called Sister Robert Joseph Bailey School.
What was her last name?
Bailey.
Bailey, right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Oh my. Have you visited that school?
We did. I went there just to see what it was like, and it's wonderful how they have a picture of her and we have a little book that when I was doing the women's committee, they wrote the book about Sister. So they have the little book there, and her theme, she used to bring the children to the hospital, and she called those days Buckaroo Days because she wanted them to get used to being in a hospital, being not scared if they had to come to a hospital. So they have Buckaroo Days as their theme at the school. And now we're doing a lot of things for they're very poor children. Well, many of them are poor. And so we've been doing a lot of things like collecting books for the children to read and other things for them.
Oh my.
Yes.
And talking about Henderson, how long have you been there?
Well, altogether, it's about 14 years. I was there 8 years and left for about 10, and now I've been back for 6.
Oh my! There's a wonderful group of Adrian Dominicans on Church Street.
There are. We live on Church Street.
Right behind St. Rose.
That's right.
Can't you walk out your back doors and?
Well, when I worked at Rose de Lima, which is the original hospital, I could walk to work. But now I work at San Martin, which is 19 miles. It's in Las Vegas. Yeah. And I love that drive, so it's really beautiful.
And have they renamed the hospital Sister Michael Thomas?
No.
No.
But she is the heart of the hospital.
Yes.
People just love her.
At St. Rose particularly.
At Rose de Lima, well, at all the hospitals, but Rose de Lima is where she is most of the time.
Yes, yes. And who are the other sisters? I know Phyllis Sikora is there and Katie McGrail.
Right, and Sister Janice Scholl is retired.
Right.
And Sister Carol Elia, I think she's renovated every room at Rose de Lima. She's a painter.
Oh,
So she's
wonderful.
done many things
What
there.
a joy.
And Sister, well, you mentioned Michael Thomas. Oh, Sister Judy Nelson. She works, she's a psychologist, so she works with people that have psychological issues.
Well, the hospital really is fortunate, isn't it? Do they miss Rod Davis,
Oh, I think
director?
so. I think so.
I used to think he was an Adrian Dominican himself.
Well, he was there a long time. He came in '91 and he left just a couple years ago.
If I may, let us go back, Vicki, to your first quote-unquote stint in Henderson. Did you ever get to know Sister Veronica? Was she there at the time?
Oh, yes. Sister Veronica Gonthier and Mary Ossenmacher were both chaplains when I first went. And Veronica had done a lot of the mission work before I got there. She was very helpful. We had to develop a mission statement. I remember Veronica was very, very helpful to me the whole time I was there. A holy lady.
And Mary Ossenmacher.
Yes, Mary was there 17 years. I don't remember if that's when I first got there or after. And she had so many stories. They had an explosion at the hospital in 1988.
An
at
explosion
the
in the hospital?
It was near the hospital. It was the PepCon explosion.
At St. Rose?
It was right near St. Rose. It was a jet fuel factory, I guess.
Oh.
And it was near a marshmallow factory. So they said that when it exploded, the marshmallow factory just went down like a marshmallow.
Oh, my.
There were a couple deaths, but they had 250 patients that day at the hospital. And Mary said that if they hadn't been building the freeway, the 95, if the berm hadn't been there, she thinks the hospital wouldn't have survived. Because one of the walls moved 6 inches from the explosion. And so
Oh, the wall in the hospital.
one of the walls in the hospital moved 6 inches from the explosion. But it was amazing for the city that the hospital was right there for those people when that happened.
And everyone was living, our sisters were all living on Church Street.
Everybody was living on Church Street. I'm sure Sister Veronica was there in her Amigo, going from person to person.
She was in her Amigo.
She was always, from '92 when I went, she was in her Amigo. I mean, she'd walk here and there, but most of the time.
Oh.
And she and Mary were the 2 chaplains taking care of all these people.
Are they the ones that helped develop the chapel?
I know Mary told me about when they built that whole structure was built in 1990, from what I recall. And she told me about the altar, who had made the altar. It was a priest father, I think, who was in the Byzantine Rite that had something to do with building that. So I don't know if she was there. Well, if I went in 92 and it was built in 90, she was there. So I wasn't there for the planning of that chapel.
But you were for
Siena.
For Siena
yes,
campus.
I was there with Sister Molly and Monica when we were planning the Siena chapel. That was a privilege.
I've seen that. That's quite beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Yes.
Yes.
And was Marge Megan hanging around at that time?
Well, Marge Megan, when I first was being interviewed for that position, Marge was in charge of missions. So she interviewed me, and she was like a mentor for me all through the time I was there. She would come for board meetings, etc., and I'd always meet with Marge. So it was a big help and a pleasure to have Marge involved.
Well, you were very fortunate.
I was
Yes.
very fortunate.
Now, you mentioned a brother and sister.
Yes.
Are they still with you?
Yes, my brother
Yes.
lives in San Diego, and my sister lives near Long Beach in California. in
So there are
Cerritos.
3 children born?
There were 4 of us, actually. I have a sister that died when I was 7. She was 5. So I still feel like she's part of our family. You know, I think my brother and sister feel like she is too, because even though they never knew her, we talked about her so much that she's part of our family.
That must have been a tragic moment for the family.
It was very hard for my mother and dad.
Do you remember how old you were at the time?
I was 7.
7.
It was the first day of school. I had been in 2nd grade and she was in kindergarten, and she came with my mother to meet me as I was crossing the street, one of the large streets, and I was with a couple of friends, and she said to my mother, I want to go meet her by myself. So my mother let her come across the little side street, and when I saw her, I said, she had a sunsuit on, a little sundress, and I said, did you go to school dressed like that? And she turned around and ran back to my mother, and when she did that, a car came around the corner that didn't see her and ran over her. Yeah, so it was...
Well, how does a 7-year-old deal with that?
Well, you know, initially I thought, I didn't realize the car hit her, because I saw her, then I saw the car, and after the car left, she was kneeling in the street with her hands like this, and I thought, why is she kneeling in the street? And my mother came right away and picked her up, and I think that's when I realized something had happened to her, because I couldn't see anything different about her other than she was kneeling in the street. So my dad came. I think that's the first time I ever saw my dad cry, when he came.
Had she died right away?
No, they took her to the hospital, so I stayed with an aunt and uncle and a cousin, and she died. They told me she died the next morning, so I never saw her after that.
Oh, my, my, my. How were your parents then about you taking and embracing religious life?
Well, my mother was fine. My father really didn't understand. I tried to enter when I was 16, and I got all the paperwork, and I took it to him, and he said, oh, you can't do this now. You have to live a normal life and date, and when you're 18, if you still want to do this, I'll let you do this crazy thing. So when I was 18, I got the paperwork again, and I just went to him and said, you told us we should always tell the truth, and you said I could do this, so here's the paperwork. So he signed it.
How did you happen to decide on the Adrian Dominicans? Because did you not have other sisters in your other congregations in your life?
It was a hard choice. I had the Notre Dame sisters for the first 3 years of school. Then I had our sisters from 4th to 8th grade. And then I had the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet in high school. They were wonderful teachers. And in the meantime, I did a lot with the Sisters of Social Service. They had retreats for young women. Mm-hmm. So it was that was the hardest decision for me, was not entering the convent. That wasn't hard. It was which group to enter.
What were you being drawn to as far as ministry before you entered?
I really wanted to do social work.
Oh my.
And I don't know where that came from, but I remember the priest, our pastor, had said to me when I told him I was having a hard time, he said, I just want you to go and talk to those Adrian Dominicans, because they're the freest group of women I know. And I didn't know what that meant, because I saw all these different groups, but I didn't know what free meant for that. So I thought, well, I'll go and talk to them. And Sister Rose Giraldo was the one that was there, and she was wonderful. But I forget what you just asked me was, how did I choose?
Yes, wanting to go into social work.
Oh, well, for the social work, one thing, it was entering the convent that was hard. I mean, the decision was hard. So when I talked with Rose Giraldo, she was just very open, and I said to her, can I just pick a group with no particular reason? She said, well, I guess you could, you know. So I thought about it and prayed about it, And I think it was the joy that I had seen in Sister Vincentia. You mean the other sisters were joyful, but not like Sister Vincentia. I had her in 4th grade and 7th grade. I think that's what drew me. And I remember Mother Gerald came to visit the sisters, and they had me meet her. And I said to her, "Can I do social work?" And she said, "Well, you'll do what you're told, won't you?" I said, "Well, of course." But I still, so I did teach. Yeah, end of story. So I taught for about 12 and a half years. And the minute I could change, the minute they offered us open placement, I thought, I am not going to go to my principal and ask to teach for another year. That's not what I want to do. Sister Jean O'Loughlin was wonderful in that regard. She knew that I wanted to change. And she came in the middle of the year and she said, "How would you like to be a counselor in a middle school?"
Oh my.
I said, "I would love that." I had already started my master's in education, and I don't think I had changed my major yet, but the minute she said that, I was able to change my major to guidance and counseling. So I moved then in February of that year, of 1968, I think. Trying to think what year it was. No, 71. 71, I was able to go to a middle school and counsel 7th and 8th graders. We had like 400 7th and 8th graders. So that was a wonderful, wonderful change for me.
And well, before the changes in the church, what was your religious name?
My religious name was Sister Victoria Marie.
Victoria Marie.
So it was the same as my baptismal name.
Oh my, that's unusual.
It was unusual.
Yeah.
And you know, I think Vincentia had a lot to do with that. My family was visiting for reception, and I had given 3 choices in, and Mother Gerald, I think, asked her, or she told Mother Gerald, that my father liked that name. So I was very surprised to receive that name because I knew it wasn't the normal thing.
Well, you helped the public by keeping the same name. But everyone calls you Vicky, right?
Everybody calls me
And
Vicky.
were you called Vicky at home?
Yes, that was really my name. But when the priest went to baptize me, he told my parents he couldn't baptize me Vicky, so he changed it to Victoria. Yes.
So that's on your baptismal.
Right, yeah, definitely.
But not on your driver's license.
No, not on any legal document, well, except like my licenses now that I've gotten since I was a sister, like counseling, etc. It's Victoria.
At one time, didn't you spend considerable time in Albuquerque?
I did.
This is before your social work.
That was my first place to teach, was Albuquerque.
Oh.
And it was beautiful there. I really loved the scenery in Albuquerque. It was very interesting. We lived it was a regular house, and the school, we had to drive from where we lived to the school. It was called Regina Caeli when I taught there, and then later they changed the name to Queen of Heaven. And I had 40 2nd graders in the morning and another 40 in the afternoon, so it was quite interesting.
Who were some of the sisters that were there with you?
Sister Marie McGowan was the superior. Sister James Phillip was with us. James Phillip Carey. Mary Carey.
James or Jean?
James Phillip. Mary Carey. Sister Tekla. Sister Stephen. Sister Dorothy Marie Beers. So I shared a room with Dorothy Marie. Because the house, we had to share rooms with each other. So that was good. It was very interesting.
Did you ever get back to New Mexico?
Oh yes, we've had chapter assemblies there, so
Oh.
it's been fun. I love that whole. I think that's the most beautiful state, New Mexico, that I've ever lived in.
Speaking of chapter assemblies, there was one year or several years in the 80s that you served as chapter prioress, correct?
Correct, yes.
Mhm.
And we had chapter assemblies, one in Phoenix and one in Las Vegas when I was chapter prioress.
And where were your quote-unquote headquarters?
Well, I was able to stay in Los Angeles. I had been living there, and I was living with like 10 sisters, and so I thought that would be helpful to stay in a place where I knew people. So I just went back and forth from there.
Geographically, what did you cover all the western states?
The southwestern states.
South.
So Sister Nelda Klein, Ellen Dolores, was my helper the first year, and so I would drive through Barstow on the way to Las Vegas, because we had quite a few sisters in Las Vegas at that time. And I went to Phoenix and Tucson. We had a sister in Utah at that time. Those were the main, those were the main areas.
Not as far as Colorado, though.
I'm trying to think of, I don't think we had anybody in Colorado. It would have included Colorado, but I don't think we had anyone.
Well, you saw parts of the country you hadn't seen before.
Well,
most likely.
I had been missioned in New Mexico and Arizona. we had often gone to Nevada when I lived in Winslow, Arizona. We often went to Henderson. So I've known Henderson since 1964. We've gone back and forth. So really, I knew the area already. I'm trying to think if I'd been in Tucson. I hadn't really been in El Paso before. I can't remember if I'd been in Tucson.
Well, have you written your autobiography?
I have at different times, for different reasons, so there's more than one.
Oh, that's great, because it's most unusual. Not many sisters that I know have lived out west, administered out west for that length of time. So how is this week? I know you came in for Nelda's funeral, Sister Nelda's funeral, didn't you?
That was a privilege. I had hoped to come for years for her funeral.
Mm-hmm.
And when she died, the week before I was coming, I thought, well, there's no way I can go twice. But then they had her funeral the week I was coming. So I was able to change my reservation a couple days earlier. Because she was such a big help to me. And I've known her since one of her first missions when she came to St. Raphael. So she taught my brother and sister. I really wanted to be here for her funeral.
And she lived in Henderson or in the environs of Henderson, didn't she, for a while?
She did after... I'm trying to think, I don't remember the years, but
Mm-hmm.
I worked with her when she was in Barstow, and then she was in Henderson.
Well, how has it been for you being back on campus? And I mean, you haven't been here this long for a long time, right?
Well, we've been fortunate. We've had our chapter assemblies here off and on, so that's, it's holy ground.
Mm-hmm.
I love being here. I love being able to go to the cemetery and walk around and think about and really pray to these people I've lived with. You know, they were so many wonderful people. Of course, I love also coming to the Dominican Lives Center and visiting people that are still alive.
Mm-hmm.
That's really more fun, actually.
And have you seen the new garden?
I went there yesterday. That is really beautiful. So peaceful and beautiful, and memories, too, of different people that are remembered there.
Yes.
On the benches, etc.
We're grateful to our donors
Oh, my.
for that.
It's
yes.
gorgeous.
And we're waiting for good weather now. It's been in the 80s. So it's kind of hard to sit out in that heat.
It's been 80s, but for me, 80s is pretty nice because it's 110 in Henderson right now. So it's been cool in the morning and cool in the evening. Yeah, last night I actually saw a deer. I was coming out of the cemetery, and this deer sort of paused and then just sort of ran across. It was a pleasure.
I always feel that's a blessing.
I do too.
Yes.
A real blessing.
I would love to know what they do at night.
Well, this one walked all the way around to where the former Mother Generals are buried, pretty much, and just sort of stood there. I couldn't see much of it except the top of his head at that point.
Perhaps getting advice from the former Mother.
I don't know. He wasn't very old. He was a young deer. Yeah.
Yes. So, do you go, when you go, do you ever visit Los Angeles now?
Well, I visit my sister's house. Usually I go there because my parents died, so that's sort of like home for me. So I stay with her at Christmas and Easter pretty much is when I go. And she often comes at Thanksgiving. Once in a while I go to see my brother, but I haven't been there in a while. He's in San Diego, so it's a lot further for me, San Diego.
I bet your family was happy when you were missioned to the West.
Oh, I'm sure. When I first went to Albuquerque, they thought that was wonderful because that's close compared to Michigan. And so they came that first December to see me. And it seems like every year, no matter where I went, my family came to, at least my parents came if it wasn't the whole family, whether I was in Hayward or Oakland, El Paso, I'm trying to think, Winslow. They came every place, yeah.
Were you in Henderson when Sister Nadia from Iraq was serving at the Siena campus?
I used to go to Henderson when I was in California. I would always go for my mission group meetings, so I saw her there, but I never lived there at the same time.
Yes. And what is Katie's position?
Katie is the Vice President of Mission at the Siena campus, which is the second hospital. It's actually the largest hospital that we have.
And Phyllis?
Phyllis is at Rose de Lima, but right now she's been also at San Martin because we're between people. We don't have another Vice President of Mission for that campus yet, so she's been doing both.
So where do you spend most of your time?
Well, when I first went 6 years ago, I was at San Martin, And then recently, when I changed to do community outreach, it actually says I'm at Siena, but I'm based at San Martin, but I do a lot at the Women's Care Center also now, which is very close to the Siena campus. I really enjoy that.
And do they do the screening for breast cancer in all the hospitals?
We
the
do
three?
that at San Martin. Actually, the program started at Rose de Lima years ago, but right now the office is at San Martin. But I'm doing more with senior peer counseling now, and so once in a while I'll interview a counselee or a client at San Martin, but most of them seem to live over closer to the Women's Care Center, so I go over there to interview them.
Didn't you have some moments in your life where you were close to the ministry of midwifery?
Oh yes, when I was, those 10 years I was in California, that was a pleasure. I worked with midwives in a Catholic hospital setting, and that was such a pleasure to be able to do counseling for pregnant moms, because their ages were from 14 to 42, and also that we had a support group for people that had miscarriages, and that was also a privilege to work with them. I really enjoyed that.
That's a major loss in women's life, isn't it?
It is. Stillborn, fetal demise, miscarriage, any of those things, yes. It's terrible.
Well, what a gift that
It was. I learned so much, and we did a lot with postpartum depression, and the wonderful thing is we're starting to do that now also at St. Rose. We're starting a group for a lot for postpartum depression, for the whole state of Nevada, actually.
Wow.
We have a grant.
Well, when your mother gave birth to you, there was no such phrase as postpartum depression.
No, I imagine it existed, but maybe they just called it depression. Who knows what they even looked at it. Yes.
Or they didn't know what to do with the woman because
right.
she wasn't herself.
It's still very hard for women to deal with even that idea that they have to, because it's supposed to be a happy time. They look forward to it, and then all of a sudden this happens. So it's hard.
What advice would you have for anyone entering the congregation today?
Well, the advice I received, and I said to Sister Rose Giraldo, how am I going to know if I'm supposed to stay? She said, if they don't send you home, you're probably supposed to stay. And that really helped me, because I was very homesick in the beginning. Because California is very different in those days from Michigan. But the advice I would give is just be open, because we've had many changes, and it's a wonderful life. But I'm sure there will continue to be changes in the world, in this life, so just remain open.
And the priest that said to you, look at the Adrians because they're freer, what does that mean to you now?
I think it was true. I found out that some communities were very strict about all kinds of things, and we always were very open to the natural gifts that a person had, that we were supposed to be who we were. We didn't need to fit into a mold. So to me, that's been a freeing kind of joyful thing.
Would you agree that risk-taking was paramount in the Adrian Dominican's lives?
Well, I think so, but I know for myself, I am a risk taker, so that's been
You
a
fit
good
right in.
fit for me. Yes.
Well, thank you for the time
Well, you're
today,
welcome.
and blessings on your Jubilee week.
Thank you,
I
Julie.
hope the joy of meeting your other persons in your crowd and your guests on Jubilee Day, that it's a celebration not only of you, but Thanksgiving
Yes.
for your life among us.
It's definitely a time
Yes.
of gratitude, thanking God for
Yeah.
these years. Yes.
Amen.
Thank you.
Hallelujah.